As many of you guys know, I am a die-hard Mizzou fan, and the subject of today's video is my favorite football player of all time. He really helped me fall in love with the game of college football. Not only was he great in my eyes, but he was also great in the eyes of many scouts. At one point, he was the projected #1 overall pick. He broke the SEC passing record for touchdowns in a season, and was drafted to be a franchise quarterback. After getting off to a historical start his rookie year, things really fell apart in year 2, and now going into year 3, some are wondering if his time as an NFL starter is done. You probably know who I'm talking about at this point, but the subject of today's video is Drew Lock. Lock was drafted to be the future of the Denver Broncos, but just recently, it was released that Teddy Bridgewater will be the starting quarterback. So what's next for Drew Lock? Well, in today's video, we're going to go through the entire Drew Lock story, as we're going to go way back in time and tell his entire journey to get to this point, his illustrious career at Mizzou, and ultimately what has gone wrong for him in the NFL. Right before we get into that, I really need your help as we're on the road to 100K, and 80% of you guys are not subscribed. You're not going to miss out on any of the content I have coming up for this college football season. Now let's get started and talk about what happened to Drew Lock. So in order to understand what happened to Drew Lock, we first need to go back in time and see how he became a big player to begin with. Football ran in the Lock's family blood, as his dad, Andy, actually played right tackle at the University of Missouri from 1986 to 1989. Drew obviously took a liking to football like his dad and became a bright young quarterback. Apparently there was a special pass that he had when he was very young, and from then on, Andy knew his son was going to be special. He said, quote, "At that point, I knew he was blessed with a gift that a lot of kids don't have, and it was all starting to fall into place. That was the time where I was like, I have to make sure as a father I do everything to help cultivate that talent and maximize that talent." He would turn his son over to a prestigious quarterbacks coach by the name of Justin Hoover and put his son in the hands of coaches he trusted. Lock grew up in Kansas City and went on to one of the premier high schools in the area known as Lee Summit. In Drew Lock's first start for that school, he was 15 years old and wowed everyone when he threw for 3 touchdowns and also ran for 2 scores. He was special from that moment on, and not only was he a great football player, but he could also play basketball. His head coach said, quote, "He was a great player. I thought as a junior he was the best player in Kansas City. When the lights came on, he was ready to play. He hit shots and played defense. He played better on the road than at home because the crowd fueled him. That's just how he was built. And he really taught our young guys how to win. He brought a skilled and winning mindset to both the football and the basketball team, and he was actually so good at basketball that he could have played for schools such as Oklahoma and Wichita State. If you're a college basketball or an NBA fan, then you obviously know the name Ron Baker, and that's who Drew Lock was compared to. Sadly, we will never know how his basketball career would have went, as he decided to quit after high school and focus 100% on football, and you could obviously say it paid off. When it came time to recruiting, he was a huge name. He was a consensus 4-star recruit, but he wasn't quite getting the top tier offers just yet. After going to the Elite 11 camp, he would finally blow up into a top 100 player, but where was he going to go? Well, Jim Harbaugh in Michigan actually recruited him extremely hard, and Lock would have to say no to him multiple times. Apparently Harbaugh even said that Drew would not make it to the NFL if he went to Missouri, but Drew did not care. Tennessee was another school that was in the mix, and then both Ole Miss and Texas were in the race, and he said he would have seriously considered the Longhorns more, but they offered him pretty late, and actually only a week before he decided to commit. He would eventually commit to the Missouri Tigers and continued that family legacy. He had this to say, quote, "I think the word home is a good word to use for Missouri. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes away, and my dad and granddad played there. One of the things that was really hitting me was thinking about possibly committing to a school other than Missouri. My parents and grandparents would obviously cheer for me, but I do not think they would cheer for the other school as well. Going to Missouri, they'd both be cheering for me and the school." At the time, Missouri was one of the top programs in the country, as they were fresh off back-to-back SEC championship game appearances, and when head coach Gary Pinkel got extended, that's what sort of sold Lock on Mizzou, and he had this to say, quote, "I was sitting in class one day, and my phone vibrated that Gary Pinkel had signed a contract extension. That was a real big deal to me, and that was exactly what I wanted to see. I feel like I can really relate to Missouri's offense since we both operate out of the shotgun, and the relationship with the coaches has been great. The family atmosphere is there as well." So yeah, he committed to the Tigers before he was a top 100 commit, and that never wavered despite all the other big-time offers. He was all Mizzou. According to 24/7 Sports, Lock was a 4-star recruit, the number 7 pro-style quarterback, and the number 98 player in the class of 2015. and he was now ready to be the future of that program. So going into his college career, he obviously had a ton of hype, and he actually be called upon pretty quickly. While Matty Mock was the starting quarterback, Locke would throw a touchdown in their first game against Southeastern Missouri State. Mock would also get in plenty of trouble off the field, which included bar fights and some drugs, so eventually he was booted off the team, and Drew Lock was forced to start. He'd make his first career start against the South Carolina Gamecocks, and he would throw 2 touchdowns in a 24-10 win. From there, it was tough sledding the rest of the year. He was a freshman quarterback that was not ready, and the offense was devoid of a lot of talent, so they lost 6 of their last 7 games. He did help them beat BYU, but that was really the only bright spot of the remainder of the year. Missouri had a down year, and Gary Pinkel would retire. He threw for 1,332 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 8 picks. Going into 2016, things were going to be a little bit different. Offensive coordinator Josh Heupel had arrived, and he would end up saving Drew Lock's career. They would lose their first game against West Virginia, but then the following week, he would show out as he threw for 450 yards and 5 touchdowns and a win over Eastern Michigan. From there, he'd have a pretty good game against number 16 Georgia, as this game was close, and he did throw 3 touchdowns, but they lost because of a Jacob Eason to Isaiah McKenzie miracle play. He then went for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns against Delaware State, and this is when the narrative of Drew Lock began, that he played well against bad teams and struggled against good teams. From there, he played atrocious against both LSU and Florida, and they even lost at home to Middle Tennessee. He really didn't have that many good games the rest of the year, and outside of a win over Vanderbilt and Arkansas, Missouri struggled as well. They went 4-8 in year 1 under new head coach Barry Odom, and his go-to target, Jamon Moore, was now going to be leaving for the NFL. He passed for 3,399 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 10 picks. 2017 would be the year that Drew Lock finally broke out. He threw 7 touchdowns in their first game against Missouri State, but once again, when it came time to play better competition, he started to struggle. They lost to South Carolina, got humiliated at home against Purdue, and got blown out by Auburn. From there, Barry Odom took the entire playbook and burned it in the trash can, and they started over. Locke started to play a little bit better, as he threw for nearly 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in a close loss to Kentucky, and he also had 4 touchdowns in a road loss to Georgia, but things were starting to look better. The team was 1-5, but the season was not over. He threw 6 touchdowns against Idaho, 5 touchdowns against UConn, 3 touchdowns against Florida, and 4 against Tennessee, as he would lead them to 4 straight wins. And then he led them on a game-winning drive, threw 5 touchdowns, and they beat Arkansas 48-45, and Brett Bielema was fired immediately after that game. Locke broke the record for single-season touchdowns in the SEC with 43, and he was playing really well. Because of that, they would go to the Texas Bowl, where he would famously be mocked by Tom Herman. Despite a couple good plays, they would lose 33-16. On the year, he threw for 3,964 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 13 picks, and established himself as a potential first-round pick and one of the top players in the country. Going into 2018, he returned his top 2 targets in Emmanuel Hall and Albert Okwuegbunam, and many thought Missouri would be a sleeper team. He had passed up the NFL for this, and I don't know, maybe it was worth it, maybe it wasn't. He combined for 13 touchdowns in their first 3 games, but the only notable win came on the road against Purdue. In what was the biggest game of his career so far, they lost at home to number 2 Georgia, then blew it to South Carolina, and then got blown out by Alabama. They are now 3-3. He bounced back with 4 touchdowns against Memphis, but once again, whenever good competition came around, he just didn't play that well. He didn't throw a single touchdown pass against number 12 Kentucky, and they lost off a phantom pass interference call. And then he had the game that most people say was the biggest win of his career and of Barry Odom's tenure. Against number 11 Florida, they'd go into the swamp, and Locke would throw 3 touchdowns without a pick, and they would beat the number 11 Gators 38-17. He'd also help them beat Vanderbilt the following week. They would beat Tennessee the week after that, and then he'd throw 2 touchdowns in a 38-0 shutout over Arkansas. The team had gone 8-4 in the regular season, and that was somewhat disappointing compared to the hype they had. He got a chance to play in one more bowl game, but despite a good performance from him, they lost. He threw for nearly 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, but they lost 38-33 against Oklahoma State, and he was stopped short on 4th down, and that would end his Missouri career. He threw for 3,498 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 8 picks, with 6 more rushing touchdowns on the ground, and some said it was a disappointing year for him. He didn't exactly help his stock, but it wouldn't really drop that much either. It was always rumored the Denver Broncos were going to get him, and that is what would happen. They ended up taking him in the 2nd round as he went 42nd overall in the 2019 NFL Draft. He was originally the backup to Joe Flacco, but everyone wanted to see what the young Locke could do. He suffered a nagging injury in preseason, but in his first career start, he would throw for 2 touchdowns and lead them down the field to set up a game-winning field goal. He would then help them upset the Houston Texans, and he had a historic rookie year for the franchise. In 5 games, he threw for over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, and only 3 picks, and went 4-1 as a starter, which is tied with their legendary quarterback John Elway for the most franchise wins by a rookie quarterback. Expectations were high for Locke going into year 2, and it actually started out pretty well. He helped them beat the Patriots, and with the win, Locke became the youngest quarterback to ever defeat the Patriots at Gillette Stadium under head coach Bill Belichick. He threw a game-winning touchdown pass to KJ Hamler against the Chargers last year, and then he would battle positive tests, and the Broncos quarterback room was a mess. He had an up-and-down second year, and some were calling him a bust, even though his best wide receiver was either Tim Patrick or a rookie. Yeah, the numbers were not good. He finished 2020 with 16 touchdowns and 15 picks, which was tied for the most in the NFL with Carson Wentz. He only played in 13 games, and that just makes it worse. He only completed 57% of his passes, which was the lowest amongst the top 35 quarterbacks in the nation, and it wasn't great. So what did the Broncos do? Well, instead of drafting a quarterback, they brought in Teddy Bridgewater to battle it out. As of a few days ago, Teddy was named the starter. So what exactly does this mean for Drew Lock? Well, he was disappointed, but he did support Teddy, and he had this to say. Quote, "I feel like at the time, I was playing some of the best football I've played since I've been in the league. I was more confident than I've ever been. Most of you guys think of me as a confident guy, but I was probably more confident than I've been since I've been in the league since OTAs, this training camp, and this preseason. This is such a special team, and I was hoping and looking forward to being able to lead them." Locke is obviously hurt by what happened, but he also is in full support of his teammate, and you have to respect him for that. He's a team player and someone who wants to see other people around him succeed, so while Drew may never be a franchise quarterback, I think he'll be a reliable backup. Locke will always be seen as one of these players with a lot of potential that never lived up to it. His arm strength and confidence was something that a lot of NFL teams liked, and it always seemed like he could reach that next level, but he just could never do it. As a Mizzou fan, he was my favorite football player of all time, and many Mizzou fans believe that Drew Lock is a big what if, because he never really won that many big games, and he was unfortunately stuck with a very mediocre coach in Barry Odom. But we will see what happens with Drew Lock moving forwards, and I'll definitely keep you guys updated. But what do you guys think? Is Drew Lock's time as a starter done? Is he a bust? And what player should I take a look at next? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section. Hit that like button if you want to support today's video. Subscribe if you are new here, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.